times the men were sort of caught up in trying to make sure that she didn't get too big. It wasn't because they didn't worry about her health. It was sort of, they had their own personal agenda, and they were giving their own unsolicited advice, and sometimes they were overstepping their boundaries. There wasn't so much support. There was them doing their own thing. That happened too. Yeah. So yeah, those were examples of the different responses they gave. There's this idea of fatherhood. Last part we talked about, and we're going to close it up. Fatherhood is ritualized transition. Like, I ask people, how has your life changed since the pregnancy? And some people get responses about there's a temporal orientation. And this goes to this idea of, disruption. People talked about, I was going to school, now I have to stop going to school, now I'm in college. Or some guy said, I'm in college and it makes me more focused about what I'm doing in my studies because she's pregnant now, so I have to step up my game. So that was a temporal orientation. Whatever my plans were, they've been changed. I have to either speed up things, or I have, like I said, leave certain things alone so I can take care of my family now. So that's a temporal orientation. There's this idea of personal growth. Personal growth talks about this idea of seeing this idea this child made me more responsible. It made me be more selective with the people I hung out with. Now I hang out less with people, or I don't hang out with a certain element anymore because, again, I have to be there for my child. So wanting to see my child grow up, that was a form of sort of self-reflection. They talked about their own personal growth. You know, in this category about how ritualized transition to fatherhood affected them, this idea of bodily emotional change, that often had to do with the mother. The mother child was seeing that she's put on weight, she has less energy. Some men, I almost refer like Kuvat-like symptoms. They were saying they're feeling her pains too, and they're showing similar symptoms that she's going through. So they felt so connected with her that they were reporting very similar responses to the mother that was expecting the child. And then there was this idea of homeostasis, this idea that nothing has really changed. It's still the same, or like, like continuity. I'm still in, things are still going the same. There's been no change since the pregnancy. And one person that said this, they already had like about 4 kids. So again, this was another process. We've been there and done that, so no change at all, And then this idea of family ties, how did it change? There's this idea of men wanting to nest, wanting to become more domesticated, spend time more at home. They talk about they don't hang out as much, but they spend more time at home. It sounds a little bit like personal growth, but it's more about wanting to be around the family. And the family talking about their role as being the need to be a provider. That was a good part of it. Now, the need to be a provider came with, it was interesting, because for men who had problems with employment, they're trying to find employment, but that also added a lot of stress for these men. So their relationship with the economy had a lot to do with it. If their provider role got called into question, like I said, some men were reporting higher rates of depression for not having fulfilled that role. But these are sort of how, these transitions were marked by stating those type of categories of what they experienced at the time of learning that the woman was pregnant and what's changed since she became pregnant. So with that, I'm going to wrap it up. So I'm going to give you time to ask questions or whatever. So I want to give you all time to let me know what it is that you thought and any questions you might have with this presentation.
Please, the floor is open.
Yes.
Can you just give me like a real small definition of the nuance? What is it called?
Masculinity?
Yeah.
It's this idea that men are building a more egalitarian. It's like you see your partner as like an equal. She's your partner. Mm-hmm. So y'all are establishing some type of partnership, this coexistence where she has a lot of seniority too. One guy, when he said he calls his wife his co-pilot. They're going through life, and that's my co-pilot. She's helping me navigate to where I need to get through. So it's seeing them as a partner and not as she's just supposed to do what I tell her.
Right.
It's not traditional masculinity. I got to lead and she got to follow, but we're sort of coming together, putting this together. We're making up as we go along, but we're in partnership with this process. So men who talked about those type of things, and like I said, being able to talk about not having all the answers or seeking out help, these are people who express these sort of nuanced masculinities, as opposed to traditional masculinity where you never ask for help, you always act like I'm in charge, and you have to always show a certain type of persona, even with your own family. And for some men who engage in nuanced masculinity, there's a continuum. They would retreat to or show certain aspects of traditional masculinity too. The guy William, he never would admit that his wife was right, but when she would call him on things and tell him what he needed to do, he would just do what he needed to do. He didn't say, "You're right, honey," but she said she saw him doing it. He never gave her credit for it, but he would do what she said he needed to do. But he never admitted that, it's, yeah, you know, you're the cause of that. He would just do it, but he never gave her credit for it. And you know, she said she's never seen him cry and stuff. And she said the thing that she was attracted to this William about was he was a very assertive, and he's a go-getter. He gets things done. He's a take charge kind of guy. I said, so yeah, all the things you're describing about William, if he sees that you saw that as attractive in him, maybe Williams he's afraid to let down and show that softer side. He figured he might pack up and leave him or whatever. Right? So we say we want one thing, but often, you know, if you showed you were appreciative of something else, you know, you can't expect him to overnight become Mr. You know, he's crying with you, and he won't cry all. No, I don't cry all the time, but he can cry sometimes, you know. So yeah, it was those type of things. But yeah, that's nuanced masculinity. You know, that's what I'm talking about. Any other thoughts?
Yes, sir.
Please,
Yeah.
this one.
You mentioned the men opposite ways to how their fathers were negative.
Yes.
How many men did you find repeated the same?
That was my question. That's a good
That's a
question.
good. That's a very good question.
What was the question?
The question was, when I talk about men who would say they're negative about their fathers, and their fathers did negative things like not being active in their lives, they said, I'm not going to be like my father, I'm going to be the opposite. How many men did that? What were the rate of men doing that? Well, for my dissertation, there were 10 men in my sample, and of the 10 men in my sample, there were about a third of them who gave responses like that. So 3, and then the 20.
Wait a minute, the third that gave responses in terms of change?
Yeah, they're not going to let their dad, because the dad had showed them
So
negative
the others.
response. Well, the others, see, that's just it. Some men, their fathers had been in their lives the whole time, and some men, you're right, they didn't take on a different persona even if their dad was negative, you know. One of the things I found for men in my dissertation was when I asked them who were your role models, and for men who talked about their role models was a woman, a mother, or some other female, those guys were more likely to demonstrate nuanced masculinity. For men that said it was another man who was the person that most, you know, influenced them, they definitely were more likely to demonstrate traditional masculinity. You know, especially early on and sometimes throughout their life, they were the closest to traditional masculinity. For the research of Dr. Misra, we interviewed about 26 men in that sample, and, you know, if I had to estimate, maybe it was maybe 20% that said that, 15 to 20% that said that they would not be like their fathers who had been absent in their lives. But there were quite a bit of men who had fathers who were absent in their lives, but some of those men who had fathers absent, there was some type of father figure still there in their lives. And for those men, they tend to be a lot better adjusted than the men who didn't have a steady male presence in their life. So yeah, if that answers your question. Yeah.
So did you? Oh, sorry. You can go.
No, that's wonderful.
Was the study strictly with men who were expecting children or had children, or was it any like single men? Or?
They were single, but they were in relationships. For Don Misra's study, she had 26 men who were in relationships with their partners. A lot of these men were, over half of them were not married to their partners. So they were partnered up, but they weren't married, many of them. But maybe a little over a third, or 40%, maybe a little over a third were married. But what I found was in those 26 couples, during the pregnancy, one of the couples broke up. And we know that a big indicator how well that man is going to be a part of that child's life is if he's still romantically involved with the partner. Once that goes south, unfortunately, a lot of times the men are not active in the lives of the children. Unfortunately. Yeah. And you had a question?
I just want to know, did you do any on the women?
Yeah, we talked to, with Don Miller say, we talked to women too. And one of the things I found interesting was when I asked, how does the father baby support the mother during the pregnancy? What I found interesting was when I asked the father that and the mother that, how often they maybe agree with each other. Maybe about 20% of the time there was total uniform agreement. Sometimes the father, he was embellishing what he did, or one minute he was doing as much as he thought he was doing. And sometimes they were right on point, you know. But how they saw that was very different. So looking at the mother's narrative and the father's narrative, you would get these different perspectives.
Right.
And in my own dissertation research, I had a few key informants where I interviewed both them and their wives. And I got to see the different sides of what they talked about.
Was it a big difference?
I mean, they look at it from slightly different perspectives, but there was a lot of overlap between them. But I think there's different ways, you know, the relationship is being really stressed with women. And men sometimes, they